Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this in-depth ag forecast here on Monday evening, brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. I wanted to start you off with one of my favorite websites. I put it in a lot of my reports. It is the Blitzer Tongue website. It's a free live lightning data website. I just bring this up for an important point. As many of you know, last week I had a very difficult time getting home due to a lot of canceled flights, and many of them were canceled based on thunderstorms. And I got stuck in Washington, D.C., and there was a lot of severe weather and thunderstorm activity going through D.C. Now, it was interesting that while I was sitting in the airport, I heard a lot of people complaining about how they did a ground stop because of all the lightning. And I told a lot of folks in there, I said, it's very unsafe to be outside right now with this much cloud-to-ground lightning strikes. And I don't think a lot of them knew this, but while we were having that discussion, there were actually 3 people that were killed by lightning in Washington, D.C. And so it's just very important to take this seriously. And I want to show you to an interesting website that NOAA maintains. It's a website that shows fatalities from lightning every year. And I want to make a couple of interesting points here. First of all, these were the last 3 deaths here in Washington, D.C., 2 males and a female. They were tourists in a park here, apparently. But what's important when you look at this is just to see the disparity between men versus women. So you can see here that far more males are struck by lightning than females. In fact, I don't know if you heard that, but there's some thunder right outside here today while I'm recording. If you go back and look at the bottom of this page, you have lightning fatalities from 2012 to 2022, and you can see again kind of the disparity here. And there's a lot of room for discussion about this if you guys want to have an interesting discussion in the comments about it. But I just thought I'd point you to an interesting resource here. And I'll make sure and link this below the video so you have access to it. Now, bigger picture, this past weekend's rainfall, all right, really hit some key areas, but missed some very important areas. And we're going to start there. This is the current 16-inch soil moisture map. And what I want to point out here, again, is some of the reasons we've been watching very carefully. Pockets throughout New England, stretching from North Carolina down to Georgia into Florida. Large area in Texas, of course, is having an extremely dry summer, one of the driest on records. But dotted throughout the plains, going through parts of Oklahoma, Kansas, a large area of Nebraska, southern Iowa, and then throughout parts of the western Cornbelt into the northern plains have been exceptionally dry. Now, when we look at this and remember how strong the southwest monsoon has been, it really gives us the setup. That southwest monsoon is a symptom of the overall flow in the atmosphere really favoring big ridges that have developed either and lived over the Mid-South or moved through the southern plains over into the Four Corner states. And the big questions we're going to keep asking is, are we going to see more and more of that pattern as we move forward? Now, this last 7 days worth of rainfall, of course, this captures some of the big rainfall that we saw early last week and through here. The nearly just constant flow of tropical moisture coming off of the Gulf, hitting those very weak boundaries here, delivering some very heavy rainfall throughout the Ohio and Tennessee Valley, also down to the southeast. Yesterday, really over the weekend, we saw very heavy rain coming out of like Sioux Falls through southern Minnesota, clipping northern parts of Iowa, getting into northern Illinois. And I was supposed to be this evening here in northern Illinois at a town called Freeport giving a talk, but 8 inches of rain nearby there. We had to cancel that particular event. But while you look at this, notice that you go to the south and west of those heavy rainfall areas into Nebraska, southern Iowa, parts of Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma. You see there were a lot of holes. And while we did see flooding rains that came into parts of like Death Valley and then raced up the spine of the Sierra Nevada mountains, and we're going to continue to see that. These rains are really going to make it pretty far to the north here. There's a spot in the middle of the country that continues to miss a lot of this. So let's look at 2 maps to kind of frame that up. This one is valid yesterday, so this is through Sunday morning. This map is always a day late because they do a day's worth of quality control on it, but it shows the last 30 days of precipitation as a percent of normal. So we can see the exceptionally strong southwestern monsoonal flow. We can see those weak sagging fronts fueled here on flow coming off of the Atlantic, out of the Gulf around a subtropical high. Please keep that in mind. I'm going to come back to that in a few moments. But you can see throughout the plains, getting the western Corn Belt and into New England, places that had been missed. Now that's the last month. Let's go back and just look at the last 2 weeks. This is where you start to see this area that was really influenced by the strength of the subtropical ridge, just missing out on this. And throughout the eastern Corn Belt, pockets in through here, getting back into parts of Iowa, Nebraska, these are just areas that have missed out a lot on the rainfall. And of course, our historic drought down here in Texas. Now, it is important to note that the southwest monsoon has delivered rains into parts of the Panhandle. I mean, look at this, getting into Colorado, areas that I was very concerned earlier in the year that we were going to see rapid drought expansion throughout all of summer. But that southwest monsoon has been a real powerful bit of the flow of the atmosphere. Now, just one thing I want to point out here. This is a map showing cumulative downward solar flux. In other words, we're looking over the last month and assessing how much of the sun's light actually made it down to the surface, in other words, got through the clouds. Where we've had some of that very heavy rain, I'm talking about this area right in through here, I am concerned about fungal pressure with this, just because it's been cloudy, the humidity has been high, and we've had a lot of moisture. And that's just something to be on the lookout for in these particular regions. But look at the extent of the southwest monsoon keeping the cloud cover up compared to normal here. Really quite impressive. Now today, the humidity is still on. If you look at this kind of outlined area I just colored in through here, this is where dew points even this evening are still well above 70 Fahrenheit. So the atmosphere is still very juicy. The flow is still certainly piling into this region. And as a result, we're seeing all those thunderstorms, which we kind of looked at here at the beginning with all of these lightning strikes. Now from here, I want to show you the latest satellite data. So we're just kind of seeing the sunset right there. As we walk back and forth over this pattern, I'm going to be seeing, I think I'm seeing some very important changes that are coming very soon. Now, it'll be a few more days before they start to show up, but this ridge that has been in the midsection of the country and moved west, I think it's going to have a little different flavor to it coming up. And that's going to affect the subtropical ridge. It's going to affect the Hudson Low we've been talking about, and also what's going on here in the Pacific. But do take note of this. As I go backward in time here and then show you these storms pop, and they are delivering very heavy rainfall. Precipitable water amounts here are over 3 inches, so these things can really put down locally heavy rainfall. But do you notice how the tops of the storms are getting blown in this direction? It's kind of a very interesting direction to see the anvil spread, and that's because this is what the upper level winds look like right now. So look at this ridge sitting right over basically Long Island, and the flow coming around it just like that. That's what's blowing the tops of those storms off in this direction. But this pattern right now is getting set up a few different ways. We need to pay attention to this short wave right in through here, the rebuilding of a ridge in this area, and also what's going on throughout the tropics. Let's step down there and have a quick look. This is the flow right now in the low levels of the atmosphere. And those big pieces we're going to see move begin with a change in this subtropical ridge and the one that's driving the southwest monsoon. It's part of that triple ridge pattern we talked about. But since we're here in the tropics, do take note that we are watching one tropical disturbance right here, and we're going to assess what we expect it to do here in the coming days. But notice how high the wind shear is going into the Bahamas or over the Lesser and Greater Antilles or coming through the Caribbean. This is what's been delivering all that moisture for those storms in this particular area. And just thinking about what could possibly happen with this particular tropical disturbance, this is the latest from the National Hurricane Center. In fact, let's just see if we got a new update on this. No, this is their 2 p.m. update. They've given it a 40% chance of developing. I'm kind of in a wait and see mode, just knowing that the environment out ahead of it here is likely not conducive for it to continue to develop. Doesn't mean that, of course, I could be wrong about this, but we're going to have to watch this very, very carefully. The other thing to point out is there's another wave coming off of Africa that could also initiate another system. But the models are really struggling with these. So this is kind of the low pressure tracks for the first system. Notice how they're not real organized. We don't yet have a tight clustering on which to start this, but there is another wave coming off of Africa to follow. So as we would expect this time of year, and we covered this last Friday, we should be expecting a ramp up in tropical activity. It's all going to help if the MJO gets in the right spot to really kick off these waves and really open up the atmosphere to rising motion here over the main development region or over the Gulf or here in this part of the Western Atlantic before we really see the seasoning have a major uptick. And there's part of me that would say if we could just deliver some tropical moisture, like a weak system coming into Texas or a weak system kind of curling around here or coming into the East Coast, delivering rainfall to those very dry areas, including parts of Florida, that could be a very important rainfall event. If I could wish on this, I would say just don't make them strong. We just want the moisture and not the problematic winds and waves and rain. So let's think about all of this and where this is going, because I got brand new long-range updates. So let's key in here on what we expect to see before we come back to this near term. All right, La Niña, still very, very strong. These trade winds, you've seen me draw this now about 100 times. there's just no change. They've been so incredibly strong. That main development region here, still a little bit warmer than average. Same thing right off the southeast coast and in the Gulf. In other words, it's plenty warm in there to develop hurricanes if we can get the other ingredients to come together, like the wind shear and the mid-level humidity. But I think one of our most driving factors in the flow right now is how warm it continues to be between Hawaii and the Aleutian Islands. And it's the positioning of this that I think is allowing for more ridging to happen here and troughs of lower pressure at times to form just off of the coast of British Columbia. So that ends up sending the flow over a ridge that seems to anchor from here to here and possibly even farther to the west. It seems to sit somewhere in there while troughs sweep in. Now this pattern at times has been kind of helped along by a southeast ridge here. So that's what's been fueling in that moisture to meet these weak fronts to drive all that rain. It helps when there's a trough of low pressure over the Hudson Bay. Okay, what in the world? Why go through all of that? There's two reasons. This is all going to change in the next couple of weeks. But this ocean temperature pattern here and here is driving all of the long-term forecasts. And because of these discrepancies and because we are heading toward a seasonal change, I mean, fall is ahead of us here, I don't have a lot of confidence in the long range right now. And let me explain to you why. First of all, the trade winds still cooking. That means La Niña still has its grip on what's going on. The Indian Ocean is flip-flop back and forth, so gone from westerlies to easterlies back over to westerlies. See that? But this trade wind pattern right here just continues to be a dominant force. Now the flipping around of the trade winds in here is allowing the MJO to come a little bit unlocked and start to move a little bit, but I still don't think it has that dominant of a hold on the overall pattern. We're still very much dealing with La Niña-like weather. Now, what this is doing in the near term versus the long term seems to be disconnected, and here's what I mean. This is your next 15 days of precipitation anomalies. And you're going to see in a few minutes, we're going to watch a ridge rebuild into the western United States just like this. And what that's going to do is that's going to send a deeper trough over the east. And caught in the middle is some drier conditions here in the western Cornbelt. But there's some questions as to how far to the north and how far to the east to the southwestern monsoon, which has been so impressive this year, can carry its moisture. We'll take a closer look at that in a few seconds. The wetter conditions you see here from the lower Mississippi River Valley over to the Tennessee and Ohio Valley, and at times spreading east, is a pretty robust feature given the trough that's going to develop here. But I want to show you the differences between this new trough and what we saw back at the end of July in the early part of August, which gave us those flooding rains. There's a major difference between the two. But what I want you to get is, this is the next 15 days. The new European weeklies were released today. This is what they're doing with August 15 to September 15. And do you notice much difference? I mean, overall, you could say the pattern's quite similar. There's some drier air in here. We're wetter where I'm putting these X's. And what that means is that most of the next 30 plus days in the weather forecast model from the European is really just carrying the bias it has in the next 15 days forward. And as a result, there's not a lot of trust that can be placed in that because the ensemble spread becomes so large once we get into the third week of August that the longer range forecast isn't giving us any information. So what do we come back and rest on to give us our forecast? Well, a lot of that has to do with, the ocean temperature pattern. We continue to see this, which means we have to watch out for troughs of low pressure here, a ridge that sets up somewhere here, probably through the Great Basin, and then we need to see what happens with respect to the trough that runs somewhere between the Hudson Bay and the Great Lakes, and if we maintain this southeastern ridge. That's going to be the big question going forward, and I'll get into those details in a second. But I'm not yet done with the longer range because what we just had released to us here today is the new European weekly, European seasonal model. It wasn't released today. It was released on the 5th. Now, everything you're about to see with the new seasonal forecast is La Niña to the T. And I've shown you this figure many times, but let's review this again. It's 1950 to present and shows you in the big spikes down when there were La Niña events. In other words, the ocean temperatures were cold in the Central Pacific along the equator versus El Niño events where they spike upward. Now, this is where we currently sit. These are our last two La Niñas, and we can make an argument that we're into our third one now. But there's not a lot of time throughout history that we've had 3 La Niñas in a row. And you also don't often see La Niñas in the past where we can just pluck off years that look like this. Two similar strength La Niñas, but the second one lasting way farther into summer than the previous. There's actually no analog going back in time to find this. So all of these long-range forecasts are betting on this La Niña still showing up here again through this winter. And the more and more I think about it and look at it and try to assess it, I think we're going to start to see a transition once we get to the end of fall. So what are the models saying? This is the brand new data, again released by the European model on the 5th. We see that through August into September, October, November, and December, our La Niña is still here. In fact, you really don't see much of an ocean temperature change, right? It's still warm to the north, and there's that La Niña signal. But then from December into January and February, that is going to be the key time to see how fast this fades. I think it'll probably start fading at some point in December, and it could fade rapidly through winter. Now, why this is so important is because of what it means to precipitation patterns here and around the globe. And we're just going to assess the United States today. We're going to look globally in future videos. So if we come into the United States here and we click on the seasonal precipitation pattern, got ahead of ourselves. This is August, September, October. It's just got the same thing. Active southwest monsoon, probably better flow along the Gulf Coast, but drier in the interior with wetter east of the Mississippi. That's been the main dividing line this year. So I don't see major changes in this. But as we go into fall, this is September, October, November, December, November, December, January, and then December, January, February. Did you see that? Let's go back. Here's fall. Look how dry it is in the southeast and up the east coast. Wetter conditions coming in the Pacific Northwest. This is now midwinter. You've heard me say this a billion times. Oh, if there's a La Niña, we tend to have an active Ohio River Valley storm track. Drier in the southeast, drier in the southern plains, drier over to California. Tends to have a jet stream pattern that comes in like that. It's that checkmark look to it. So the Pacific Northwest is wetter. I'll just be honest with you. This will only happen if this La Niña completely regains the position it had last winter. And I don't see that happening at this point. So I'll come back to this in just a few seconds, but I thought we would at least add in another forecast group that's been putting out their forecast, and that comes from the Farmer's Almanac. Now, I don't know who does this. I don't know who makes the Farmer's Almanac, but there was a couple of things that a few of my friends on Twitter were pointing out this week, and it's that every year their map actually has the same coloring. They just change the words up a little bit. But they almost always forecast the same overall look. So take a look at this. This is this year's upcoming forecast, and you can read the descriptors here if you want. But this is what it looked like, a year ago. And then the year before that. So I don't know how many of us are using the Farmer's Almanac to make a prediction, but I wouldn't recommend it. What I can tell you is this. When you go back there and look at those months of October through December, so fall, the years that we had stronger La Niña events, they tended to be drier in the southeast and into parts of New England. This is a little bit interesting. I think we're actually going to have a quicker onset of moisture in the northwest and in Northern California than what's advertised here. But they tend to be drier for fall in this area. On the same vein, let's go do this instead of precipitation. Let's look at temperatures. And now when we look at this particular plot, there is kind of a weaker correlation with some cooler conditions in the northern plains and in the south. I mean, most of the country has a cooler fall into early winter when there is a La Niña. Now, can we use this right now to say that there's going to be an early frost? We cannot. We can't do that. But it would just say that the likelihood of having a really hot a really hot finish to the year going into winter, it just doesn't seem to be in the works, given that this La Niña will likely be around through December. So we need to just distill all this down to remember that these long-range forecasts they're speculative. They're based on a few variables, and the biggest variable they're based on are these ocean temperature patterns. So that's what we're going to be watching week in and week out. All right, from there, let's go talk about what's going on currently. Our all hazards weather map this evening. We had wildfire risk here in parts of Oregon, excessive heat in the Pacific Northwest, dealing with flooding here and down in the Mojave Desert. It's been a long day. And down in Death Valley, still more flooding down here. And then you can see an area that we got flood watches. And then there's still heat here in parts of New England and also parts in the lower Mississippi River Valley. So again, if we just start in the west, take a look. This is some of the satellite data from this afternoon. We are monitoring wildfire smoke from some fires here in Northern California. But what will be interesting to watch is, do you see the cyclonic spin? That's the counterclockwise spin right here. That is a part of a short wave that's actually going to be taking more of that monsoonal moisture farther and farther to the north, meaning that over the next few days, okay, so the flow's coming around it like this, it's going to be bringing a lot of storms here into the Pacific Northwest. They're going to probably generate quite a bit of lightning and potentially start more of these fires. We've been watching where that wildfire smoke is forecast to go over the next couple of days, and this is just an animation from the high-resolution rapid refresh model. Can you see now that southerly trajectory? In other words, it's moving to the north as that shortwave kind of comes on shore here. So let's watch this one pretty carefully over the next couple of days. This is the high-res NAM model from this afternoon, and let's get this queued up for right about when I'm recording there. It is about 6, 7 o'clock. So our frontal boundary is in through here. You probably heard some of the thunder outside my window. That's from the storms that came over east central Illinois. But we have a lot of areas here throughout the whole of the southeast getting up to this boundary that are seeing big storms this evening. Locally very heavy rain. What I'm going to be watching late this afternoon and this evening is to see if we can deliver some scattered storms into this area, the tail end of that front, to help bring in some moisture into some very dry regions and parts of the southern plains. Now watch over here for just a moment as we go from Tuesday morning throughout the day on Tuesday and Wednesday. See that? Can you see the flow coming right out of the south, going through California, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington, just pouring straight north on this monsoonal flow. By Tuesday evening, the front sagged to the south, so you see again scattered storms along that front. We just play this on out into Wednesday, and eventually let's just stop it right here early in the morning on Thursday. So that's what we're keeping an eye on, that slowly sagging front. But this is the end of it. This is where the pattern changes what I'm watching. And let me show you what I'm seeing here. Okay, as we play through the end of this week, now this is a different view than I normally give you. You're looking here at the Northern Hemisphere view. We see that by Friday, come right down here, this is where the ridge sits. So there's our trough off the west coast, big ridge sitting here, and an east coast trough there. Now that's going to bring the heat back into the middle part of the country as we look out into the weekend. And then as we start next week, let's pause it 1 week out. This is where I really want to focus. Because what I'm seeing is this highly amplified pattern here, not blocked, but amplified. There's still a trough off the west coast. The ridge expands in the mid part of the country and then dives into this east coast trough. We do have a high over a low block that's out here over the open Atlantic. And this is important because of the position it puts the subtropical high I told you about earlier. Because as I play forward into next week, look where the pattern goes. In fact, let's just stop it there at day 10. Now you're saying, what's the big idea? Well, the ridge is here, pushing heat all the way up into the Canadian Prairie, into the northwest. We're going to have convergent flow in the midsection of the country and a deep trough here. Now, if you remember back at the end of July and the beginning of August, where we saw that torrential rain in here, there was a trough here, but it was connected to a deeper trough that was over the Hudson Bay. Now, what's the difference? The flow came around and the lows curled up into the Hudson Bay, leaving weak fronts that came through just like this. And what did they meet? A subtropical ridge that was here that brought the moisture in. That's not what we have now. This whole pattern has changed. You see, this is what that pattern looked like. See the deeper trough there? There's the subtropical ridge bringing in that moisture. The flow came over the top, and there was no block. It's the opposite. No block here in the North Atlantic. That's what gave us the setup at the end of July and beginning of August for all the extremely heavy rains we've seen in places through this part of the country. So it's different. And what I want to explain to you is if we lose this anomalous flow like this, that's that moisture return, then this is no longer going to give us the threat for extremely heavy rainfall in this area, even though the pattern is going to favor more rain. So what I'm telling you is the forecast is not advertising exceptional, and flooding rains anymore, but it still looks wet in those areas. Okay, what's going on? Multi-model analysis. Both models right now are performing about equally on their skill scores. The GFS has kind of stepped up. So we've seen through Tuesday into Wednesday. Let's stop it here Thursday morning. At that point, the front has sagged over here as you look on the European pretty far to the south, and there's a high pressure cell in both models that's sitting between Manitoba and Ontario. The European model on Thursday into Friday is attempting to initiate some surface convergence here, helped along by a little short wave coming over this area to increase rainfall. So if you watch, Thursday night into Friday morning, the model's more aggressive on the rainfall coming right into this section of the northern plains just south of the Red River Valley of the North. At that point, though, by Friday night, the front is almost cleared, so we're just seeing some scattered storms down here in the south, and high pressure has moved in to the eastern part of the country. Take a look at the extent of the southwest monsoon, though. It's in both models. That's what we were watching all week, was to see how far to the north that was going to go. But then as we play through the weekend and get into early next week, this is the point where the ridge is fully reestablished here. So we could get some ridge-riding storms that come over the top of this. And we're also going to see a storm system showing up here on Sunday that's going to curl through the Canadian Prairie. But did you see that? See these ridge-riding storms coming over the top? But instead of stalling out on weak boundaries, these are going to dive into a low pressure cell that's going to develop here in that trough next Tuesday into Wednesday. And you can almost see it curling up in this area. And that's been an interesting factor to be watching. The model split a little bit on this. Okay, can you tell the difference between the European over here I've been drawing on and the GFS? The GFS brings in a big ridge, it just sweeps a big front through, whereas the European takes that trough and really lets things curl up in there, delivering some rainfall. Now, parts of the East Coast need this, but let's compare the models as we move toward the end of this video. This is the next 7 days from the European model, and this is the next 7 days from the GFS. So you can certainly see some overlap, like in the southwest monsoon, the flow coming here, delivering the rains in the southeast. That is certainly in both models. But here's the big difference. Take a look at this. Look at the storm system coming through this part of the Canadian Prairie. And the European is wetter in the near term in parts of the southeast, getting into the Tennessee and Ohio Valley. So we'll watch this carefully as we progress forward. Now, one of the big concerns that I'm seeing in the models, which is very important to see these rains manifest, is that the CPC just updated their hazardous risks for week 2. That'd be the 16th to the 22nd. And they're watching for flash drought development here and here, critical parts of the U.S. Cornbelt. They're watching still strong southwestern monsoonal flow coming up into the Four Corner states. And the reason for this is that the week 2 forecast in the European is delivering that moisture here, but it's suggesting that more heat and may get a little drier around the periphery right in through this area. Now, does the trough deliver better rains into this region? Could certainly do that. But this is the spot that they're watching most carefully, so we need to watch it as well. Now, will the temperatures be working for or against this flash drought development? Well, initially they're going to work against, but I think you're going to see some moderation in what we've had for the last, about 40 days or so. So this is all of July into this first 7 days of August. We're looking at average temperature ranks by climate district. Texas's drought and excessive heat has just been record-setting. We also saw, of course, during the month of the end of July, into early August, a lot of heat moving into the northwest. But take a look at this map. It's the same map, but instead it shows you average low temperature ranks. So now we can start to see where those overnight lows have been so exceptionally hot in places like the Mid-South, into southern plains, the Four Corners, and up the West Coast. So it's very important to be seeing that also right here across the coastal Carolinas. Just want to point that out because this is what our temperatures are doing right now. Monday's highs show us right where that front is located. But as we play this forward, the heat comes out of the northwest and starts to settle right back into the northern plains Tuesday into Wednesday. So we can see the heat coming back on here, and this is that area where we're concerned about flash drought development. As we then play into Thursday and Friday, again, another surge of heat. This is all associated with that ridge that's developing here, 100 degrees in Nebraska once again. We go into the weekend, there's Saturday and Sunday, and if you notice, a lot of the temperature forecast is split right on the Mississippi River for the midsection of the country. We also see some moderation in the northwest and through the California Central Valley too as we work our way toward the weekend. But that 5-day sliding window gives us a lot of information on how the pattern is shifting. As we play this out here, day 5 through 10, which gets us out to the 18th, so it's the 13th through the 18th, again, that's when the ridge is really opening up and delivering the heat. But you saw that it was going to be building more in this direction. So watch as we go from day 5 through 10 out to day 10 through 15. See, the heat goes back into the northwest throughout the Canadian Prairie, And we now see more cooler days here, which again, something I'm concerned about the fungal pressure we could have there on the crops. And we lose the excessive heat signature we saw in the midsection of the United States. It also fell out of the GFS ensemble as well. From here, I just want to give you a couple of international things to think about. Europe, we still have very hot temperatures coming through France and Germany, also the UK. So another heat wave kind of in place here, much above average temperatures. Also without the Russian wheat belt, very hot conditions right now in this part of Russia. But there's some storms in eastern Ukraine, try that again, western Ukraine, and also down here in parts of France and Spain. But the interior of Europe is looking quite hot and quite dry at this particular point. I got a question about what's going on in Mexico, so let's talk about it really quickly. This is, let's blow this up. You look back over the last couple of months, we can see that there has been regional drought development through a large section of Mexico. We need to see if this is having an impact on the crops that are grown here due to how dry things have been. We would categorize this as extreme drought in certain places here. So I wanted to keep you aware of that. And the last thing I'm going to bring up here comes back to South America and looking at their September, October, November outlook. So let's just have a hypothetical here and say that this forecast verifies. That means Mato Grosso over toward Goiás, Tocantins, Minas Gerais, Bahia, this area, which represents about 60% of the soybean crop, would probably plant on time or even faster than normal if this verifies. By the way, why is there such a wet bias north and a dry bias south? Remember, about 40% of the soybeans are grown here for Brazil. This is exactly what would happen if there's a La Niña. You see, they're anchoring the dryness between Paraguay, Uruguay, southern Brazil, and Argentina. That would be where we could have some early season problems. And we certainly saw drought develop in regions throughout this past winter for South America. But I want to put out just another number there. We're expecting somewhere in the neighborhood of 4% increase in acreage in Brazil for soybeans. This is just an increase, conversion of pasture land over to corn and soybeans. If they do increase by 4 acres, that would mean that the possibility of this crop exceeding 150 million metric ton is there, and a 4% increase in acreage is worth about a Kansas worth of soybeans added into production in South America. So all eyes are about to turn to the Southern Hemisphere as they start planting, and again, those dates open up on September 15th, and we're going to be watching these long-range forecasts to see how they evolve for that growing region next. So I appreciate your extra attention today. Hope you all have a good rest of your week, and I will talk to you again very soon. Thanks.